You're watching Revenge Mode, and today's story comes from Memphis, Tennessee. That night, the heavy Memphis rain battered against my windshield, but nothing could dampen the fire burning in my chest. My name is Eileen Benson, a 32-year-old software engineer who had just accomplished the impossible. I looked down at my phone, my hands trembling not from the cold, but from the notification glowing on the screen. Tranche 1 payment $8 million deposited. It was the first payout for the logistics software I had spent 5 years building. The total deal was worth $31.5 million. I wasn't thinking about mansions or luxury cars. I was picturing the relief on my parents' faces. I drove through the storm ready to tell them that their debts were gone, that I was finally the savior they always needed. But the moment I stepped onto the porch, my world froze. I reached for the door handle but stopped dead when I heard my father's voice, low and conspiring, drifting through the thin wood. If that girl finds out about the $470,000 inheritance, everything is ruined. Her share is just a massive liability we can't afford. My breath caught in my throat. Before I could process the confusion, my mother's cold whisper cut through the noise of the rain. Then we have to handle that liability before the court divides the assets. We need to erase her name from the list tonight. I stood there paralyzed between fury and heartbreak. I had come home with $31.5 million to save them, and they were inside plotting to steal my grandmother's legacy and cut me out of the family for a few $100,000. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was just a financial obstacle. If you found out your family was plotting to betray you moments before you changed their lives forever, what would you do? Hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments before we see exactly how they pay for this betrayal. Fighting back the urge to scream, I took a deep breath. I slid my phone and my secret fortune deep into my coat pocket. I wiped the rain and the look of betrayal off my face, replacing it with an expression of naive exhaustion. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. It was time to watch their performance. The heavy wooden door swung inward, revealing a scene that shifted so abruptly it felt like a glitch in a video file. For a fraction of a second, the living room was warm, filled with the clinking of glass and relaxed posture. But the moment their eyes landed on my soaking wet figure standing in the doorway, the atmosphere was sucked out of the room as if an airlock had been breached. Doris, my mother, was the first to react. She was standing by the fireplace holding a crystal goblet half filled with a deep ruby-red liquid. Her eyes widened in panic, and she jerked her hand behind her back with a clumsiness that almost sent the wine splashing onto the carpet. Her face, flushed pink a moment ago, contorted instantly into a mask of exaggerated frailty. She slumped her shoulders, letting out a wheezing cough that sounded more like a theatrical performance than a medical symptom. "Eileen!" she gasped, clutching her chest with her free hand while still hiding the glass behind her. You didn't say you were driving down tonight. My heart. It's been palpitating all day. We didn't even have money for the heating oil, so we're just huddled here." I stepped inside, closing the door against the storm. The house was warm, too warm for a family claiming they couldn't afford oil. But it wasn't the heat that hit me. It was the smell. As Doris rushed over to give me a stiff, obligatory hug, a wave of scent washed over me. It wasn't the smell of poverty mildew or old medicine. It was distinct. Woody, leathery, with notes of cardamom and violet. Santal 33 by Le Labo. I knew this scent because I had bought a bottle for myself to celebrate my first million. It cost nearly $300 a bottle. My mother was wearing a ragged, moth-eaten bathrobe that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. Yet she reeked of a niche luxury perfume that cost more than her monthly grocery budget. The cognitive dissonance made my stomach turn. I pulled away gently, keeping my face neutral. "I wanted to surprise you, Mom. I thought you might need help." My eyes scanned the room, my brain entering the same analytical mode I used when auditing code for bugs. The anomalies were everywhere. On the coffee table, a bottle of Opus 1 wine sat uncorked. Doris hadn't been fast enough to hide that. Beside it, Nadine was frantically shoving something under a pile of old newspapers. I caught the glossy sheen of the cover before it disappeared. Luxury Estates magazine. Wayne, my father, sat at the head of the dining table. He didn't get up. He was hunched over, massaging his temples as if carrying the weight of the world, but his eyes were sharp, calculating, darting between me and a thick manila envelope resting under his hand. "Help!" Wayne's voice was gravelly, devoid of warmth. "Unless you brought a miracle, Eileen, we're done for." The bank called again. "They're threatening to foreclose by the end of the month. We're going to be on the street." He slid the envelope across the table. The friction of the paper against the wood sounded like a hiss in the quiet room. "I've been fighting them all week." Wayne lied, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I managed to get them to agree to a debt restructuring plan. It saves the house, keeps a roof over your mother's head. But they need all family members on the deed to sign off on the paperwork. It's just a formality to consolidate the assets." I walked over to the table, water still dripping from my coat, onto the floor. I picked up the document. He had clipped the pages back so only the signature line was visible, hiding the dense legal text above. "Just a formality?" I asked, my voice calm. "Standard banking procedure." Wayne insisted, tapping the table impatiently. "Sign it, and we survive another year." I flipped the clip open. My eyes raced through the legalese. I didn't need a law degree to understand keywords. I dealt with contracts daily. There were no words like restructuring or consolidation. Instead, terms like irrevocable waiver, quit claim, and release of interest in future assets jumped out at me. This wasn't a loan modification. It was a legal instrument designed to strip me of any claim to family assets, specifically assets currently in probate. They were trying to trick me into signing away my share of the inheritance before I even knew it existed. As I held the paper, pretending to struggle with the font, movement caught my peripheral vision. Nadine had stood up to pour herself a glass of water, trying to act casual. As she reached for the pitcher, the sleeve of her oversized sweater slipped down. The light from the chandelier hit her wrist, and I saw it. A tennis bracelet. White gold. Paved with diamonds that refracted the light with a fire that cubic zirconia simply couldn't replicate. It looked brand new. "That's beautiful, Nadine," I said, pointing directly at her wrist. "Things must be tight if you're wearing 5 carats of diamonds." The room froze. Nadine yanked her sleeve down, her face turning crimson. She looked at Wayne for help, panic flashing in her eyes. Wayne didn't miss a beat. "Don't be ridiculous, Eileen," he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "I bought that for her at the flea market on 3rd Street. It's glass and cheap metal. Cost me $10 to cheer her up since she's been so depressed about our situation." "It sparkles quite a bit for glass," I countered, keeping my tone light, almost playful. "Good polish," Doris chimed in quickly, her voice shrill. "Now stop distracting us with jewelry. The bank closes the file tomorrow morning. Your father needs that signature tonight." I looked at them. Really looked at them. The expensive perfume, the premium wine, the real diamonds, the lies about foreclosure. The deduction clicked into place in my mind like a final line of code. They hadn't just spent their own share of the inheritance. They had spent mine too. They must have taken out high-interest bridge loans or run up credit cards on the certainty that they would secure the full $470,000. If I claimed my share, their house of cards wouldn't just fall, it would burn. They weren't desperate for survival. They were desperate to cover their theft. I dropped the document back onto the table, but I didn't pick up the pen. I rubbed my temples, feigning a sudden sway in my stance. I can't focus," I stammered, letting my eyelids droop. The drive was brutal. The rain was blinding for 3 hours, and I think I have a migraine coming on. The words are swimming on the page, Dad. I can't sign legal documents when I can't even read them. Wayne's jaw tightened. "It takes 2 seconds, Eileen. Just sign the damn thing." "And if I sign the wrong line because I'm dizzy, the bank voids it," I said, using their own bureaucratic lie against them. "Let me sleep on it. I'll sign it first thing in the morning over coffee. The bank doesn't open until 9, right? I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and headed for the stairs before they could argue. Eileen, wait. Doris started, but I was already gripping the banister. Good night, Mom. Good night, Dad. I called back, my voice trembling with feigned exhaustion. I walked up the creaking wooden stairs, feeling 3 pairs of eyes burning into my back like laser sights. They were terrified. Good. As I reached the landing and turned the corner towards my old room, the facade of the weak, tired daughter dropped from my face, replaced by cold determination. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to war. The next morning, I slipped out of the house before the sun had fully breached the horizon. The hallway floorboards, which usually creaked under the slightest weight, seemed to conspire with me, remaining silent as I passed the bedrooms where my family slept. The deep, heavy sleep of the guilty. I didn't take my car immediately. I pushed it down the driveway in neutral so the engine roar wouldn't wake Wayne or Doris. Once I hit the main road, I gunned the engine, putting miles between myself and the suffocating atmosphere of that house. My destination wasn't the office, but downtown Memphis. I parked in front of the Shelby County Probate Court just as the heavy bronze doors were being unlocked for the day. The air inside smelled of dust, floor wax, and centuries of bureaucratic secrets. I need to pull the probate file for Beatrice Benson, I told the clerk, keeping my voice steady. She passed away 3 months ago. Since probate records are public domain in the United States once filed, the clerk didn't ask questions. She simply pointed me to a viewing terminal. I sat down, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. A part of me, the part that was still a daughter, hoped I was wrong. I hoped that maybe there was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But as the digitized documents loaded onto the screen, that hope was extinguished forever. The last will and testament of Beatrice Benson was clear, concise, and indisputable. My grandmother had left a liquid estate of exactly $470,000 to be divided equally among 4 beneficiaries: Wayne, Doris, Nadine, and Eileen. My eyes scanned down the list of filings until I found it. Document number 14, Affidavit of Diligent Search and Inquiry. My stomach dropped. This was a document used when an heir cannot be located. I opened the PDF, and there it was, signed in my father's distinct, jagged handwriting. I, Wayne Benson, executor, hereby swear under penalty of perjury that I have made diligent efforts to locate the beneficiary Eileen Benson. It has been determined that she is currently residing overseas in an undisclosed location in Europe and cannot be contacted. Therefore, I petition the court to hold her share in trust under the administration of the executor. I let out a short, cold laugh that echoed in the empty records room. Perjury. Wayne hadn't just tried to trick me, he had committed a felony. He had lied to a judge, claiming I was missing in Europe while I had been living 3 hours away, paying for his Netflix subscription and sending Mom allowance money every month. The waiver he tried to force me to sign last night wasn't to restructure debt. It was a retroactive cover-up. If I signed that waiver, I would be voluntarily giving up the claim, making his lie irrelevant and saving him from prison. I printed the documents. Every single page. I didn't confront him yet. I needed to secure my own fortress first. I drove 6 blocks to the Memphis branch of a private wealth management firm. The contrast between the dusty courthouse and the marble-floored bank was jarring. I was ushered into a private office where I placed the check for $8 million on the mahogany desk. The banker, a man who had seen everything, still raised an eyebrow at the number of zeros. I want this placed immediately into an irrevocable blind trust. I instructed, my voice cutting through the silence. I want the beneficiary structure locked down so tight that even a federal subpoena would have trouble piercing it. And I want the trustee to be a third party completely unconnected to the name Benson. We can have that structured by noon, he assured me. Is there anything else? Yes, I said, pulling out my phone. I need to make a change to my personal credit accounts. I dialed the customer service number for my Platinum American Express. For 5 years, I had authorized a supplementary card for Doris. It was meant for emergencies, groceries, medicine, gas. But over the years, emergencies had morphed into designer shoes and spa treatments. I had enabled it thinking I was being a good daughter. Now I saw it for what it was, paying a salary to my own executioner. Security verification complete. The automated voice chirped. I am reporting the supplementary card ending in 4098 as compromised, I said, staring at the wall. Cancel it immediately. No replacement. The card has been deactivated. The operator confirmed. It was done. My $8 million was invisible, locked away in a legal fortress. Their lifeline was cut. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter, as if I had shed a heavy skin. I got back into my car and began the drive back to the suburbs. I needed to act normal to play the part of the confused, migraine-ridden daughter for just a little longer, until the trap was fully set. I was merging onto the highway when the silence of the car's cabin was shattered. My Bluetooth system engaged, overriding the radio. The dashboard screen flashed the name Mom. I pressed the answer button on the steering wheel. I didn't even get to say hello. Eileen? Doris's voice exploded through the surround sound speakers, distorted by pure, unadulterated rage. What did you do? I'm at the checkout at the L'Occitane spa. The card was declined. The girl said it's been reported stolen. I gripped the steering wheel, a small, cold smile playing on my lips as the Memphis skyline faded in the rearview mirror. The war had officially begun. I didn't even have to turn the key. The front door was yanked open from the inside before I could step onto the porch. The heat of the argument hit me instantly, drier and more suffocating than the humid Memphis storm outside. Something sharp and plastic struck my chest and clattered onto the hardwood floor. I looked down. It was my Platinum American Express card, cut cleanly in half. You humiliated me! Doris shrieked, her face a mask of cosmetic-enhanced fury that cracked under the weight of her rage. I was standing at the register with my friends Eileen. The cashier looked at me like I was a criminal. How dare you cancel my card? I stepped inside, kicking the broken pieces of plastic aside with the toe of my boot. That card is for emergencies, Mom. A spa treatment isn't an emergency. Neither is the $3,000 you spent at Saks Fifth Avenue last month. I needed that to look presentable for the wedding, she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. You ungrateful, selfish brat. You make good money with your little computer games, and you begrudge your mother a facial. Enough. Wayne's voice boomed from the living room. He wasn't sitting at the table anymore. He was standing in the center of the room, his posture rigid, his face flushed with a dangerous mix of alcohol and adrenaline. The mask of the weary, debt-ridden father had completely dissolved. In its place stood the man I truly remembered, a bully who used anger to control the narrative. He marched towards me, stopping just inches from my face. I could smell the stale whiskey on his breath. I am done playing games with you, Eileen. He spat, his voice low and menacing. You think because you pay a few bills you own this house? You own nothing. I am the head of this family. He snatched the waiver of claim document from the table and slammed it against the wall, holding it there with a heavy hand. You have two choices. Wayne growled, his eyes narrowing into slits. You sign this paper right now, authorizing me to handle the family assets as I see fit. Or I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. You're over 18, you have no lease, and you're not welcome here anymore, unless you learn your place. Nadine, lounging on the sofa, didn't look up from her phone, but a cruel smirk played on her lips. Just sign it and leave, Eileen, she drawled. We all know you're just jealous because Blake is rich and successful, and you're going to die alone with your cats. Stop trying to sabotage my happiness. I looked at them. The mother who saw me as a credit limit, the sister who saw me as an obstacle, the father who saw me as a liability to be liquidated. My eyes shifted to the document pinned against the wall. My brain switched into cold, calculating overdrive. If I refused to sign now, Wayne would carry out his threat. The police would come. It would be a scene. More importantly, if I declared war tonight, Wayne would panic. He would hide the $470,000 in offshore accounts or bury it in cash where I'd never find it. He would drag the probate battle out for years, draining the estate's value in legal fees just to spite me. But if I signed, they would think they had won. They would think I was defeated, broken, and out of the picture. They would get arrogant. They would spend the money. They would leave a paper trail a mile wide. And when the trap finally snapped shut, there would be no escape. I needed them to feel victorious. Fine, I whispered, letting my shoulders slump in a performance of defeat that rivaled Doris's earlier act. I can't fight you anymore, Dad. You win. Wayne's chest puffed out. He uncapped a pen and shoved it into my hand. Smart choice. I took the pen. I took a deep breath. And then I switched the pen to my left hand. I am right-handed. I have been right-handed my entire life. Wayne knew this, but he was too blinded by his own triumph to notice the switch. I pressed the tip of the pen to the signature line. I wrote my name slowly, letting my hand shake, creating a jagged, unnatural scrawl that looked nothing like the crisp, professional signature on my bank records. Forensically, this signature was a masterpiece of invalidity. In court, I could prove it was signed under duress, or even argue it wasn't my signature at all. It was a ticking time bomb, and I had just lit the fuse. I capped the pen and handed it back to him. There, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. It's done. Wayne snatched the paper, inspecting it greedily. He didn't check the quality of the signature. He only checked that the line was filled. See, was that so hard? I walked over to the corner where my suitcase was still standing from the night before. I extended the handle and wheeled it toward the door. Before I stepped out into the rain, I turned back to look at them one last time. They were already celebrating. Wayne was pouring another glass of wine, and Doris was picking up the pieces of the credit card as if she could tape them back together. One last thing, I said, my voice cutting through their celebration. They looked up, annoyed that I was still there. I hope you're happy, I said, articulating every syllable clearly. I hope the $470,000 you stole from Grandma Beatrice is enough to buy you the peace of mind you're going to need. The silence that followed was absolute. Wayne dropped the wine glass. It shattered on the floor, red liquid pooling like blood. His jaw dropped, his eyes bulging as the specific number hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to stammer a denial, to ask how I knew, but I didn't give him the chance. I opened the door and walked out. The storm had settled into a steady, rhythmic rain. I didn't run. I walked calmly down the driveway, the wheels of my suitcase humming on the wet pavement. A sleek black SUV was already waiting at the curb, my Uber Black. The driver stepped out and took my luggage. Head to the Peabody Hotel, ma'am. Yes, I said, sliding into the leather back seat. The Peabody. As the car pulled away, the house where I had grown up faded into the gray mist of the rearview mirror. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't sadness. It was the thrill of the hunt. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Sarah, my attorney. The bait is taken. They have the document. Start Plan B. I pressed send and watched the message status change to delivered. Then I leaned back and watched the rain streak against the window, washing away the last traces of Eileen the daughter and making way for Eileen, the CEO. 30 days. That was exactly how long it had taken for silence to become my favorite sound. I sat in the ergonomic leather chair of my penthouse office, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls. Below me, the Mississippi River churned, a massive artery of commerce and power, indifferent to the lives of the people on its banks. At this height, the chaos of Memphis was reduced to silent, twinkling lights. There was no peeling paint, no shouting, and certainly no smell of cheap whiskey mixed with desperation. The projection for Q3 looks solid, Ms. Benson. The voice on my laptop speaker said, pulling me back from the view. But the logistics integration in the Atlanta hub is lagging. Then cut the vendor. I said, my voice calm but absolute. We don't pay for lag. Terminate the contract and switch to the backup provider we discussed. I want it done by close of business. Understood. We'll handle it. I closed the laptop, ending the board meeting for the subsidiary company I had acquired just a week after leaving home. This was my life now. I wasn't just writing code anymore. I was moving pieces on a board that Wayne and Doris didn't even know existed. A soft chime signaled an incoming encrypted file transfer. It was from Sarah, my attorney. The subject line read simply, "Status report, the beneficiaries." I opened the file. It was a comprehensive dossier compiled by the private investigator we had hired to monitor the fallout of my surrender. Reading it was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, horrifying yet impossible to look away from. The waiver of claim I had signed with my left hand had acted exactly as I intended. It was the green light for their self-destruction. Wayne hadn't wasted a second. The report included photos of a brand new cherry-red Cadillac Escalade parked in the driveway of the crumbling house. He had leased it at an exorbitant interest rate using the inheritance, which hadn't even been fully probated yet, as collateral for a high-risk bridge loan. Doris wasn't far behind. Her credit card statements obtained through a subpoena related to my trust's security audit showed thousands of dollars dropped at Neiman Marcus and local jewelry boutiques. They were spending the $470,000 as if it were $4 million. They were bleeding money they barely had in hand. But the centerpiece of their financial suicide was Nadine. I scrolled to the section titled "The Wedding." It was staggering. They had booked the River King Ballroom at the Grand Magnolia Hotel, the most expensive venue in Memphis. The deposit alone was $50,000. They had ordered imported orchids, a 7-tier cake from a celebrity baker, and a custom silk gown from Paris. They were building a royal wedding on a foundation of quicksand. Then I reached the section on Blake the groom. "Oh, Nadine," I whispered to the empty room, a cold smirk touching my lips. "You really have no idea, do you?" The investigator had dug deep. Blake wasn't a real estate tycoon. He was a glorified calm man with a credit score in the low 400s. He didn't own the luxury condo he took Nadine to. He was house-sitting for an uncle who was in prison. But the real bombshell was his debt. Blake owed nearly $150,000 to private lenders, a polite term for loan sharks operating out of the back of a pool hall in West Memphis. The report confirmed my hypothesis. Blake was marrying Nadine because she had bragged about the massive family windfall. He was counting on her inheritance to save his kneecaps. He was a parasite attaching himself to a dying host. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Did you read the section on the wedding vendor?" she asked, skipping the pleasantries. "I'm looking at it now," I replied, scrolling to the bottom. The event planning company Wayne had hired, Southern Charm Events, was in financial ruin. They were months behind on payments to the hotel and catering staff. They were desperate for a buyout to avoid bankruptcy before the wedding season kicked into high gear. "They are holding the contract for Nadine's wedding," Sarah explained. "If they go under, the event is canceled. But if someone were to acquire their assets—" "We don't want it canceled," I said, leaning back in my chair. "We want it controlled." I spun the chair around to face the river again. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the water. "Sarah, initiate Protocol Phoenix," I commanded. "Use the shell company, Phoenix Holdings. Buy out Southern Charm Events completely. Purchase their debt, their assets, and every single existing contract, including the Benson wedding." "You want to own her wedding?" Sarah asked, a hint of amusement in her professional tone. "I want to own the ground they walk on," I corrected. "I want to be the one who signs the checks for the flowers, the food, and the lights. On paper, Phoenix Holdings will just be the new parent company saving a local business. But in reality, I will hold the power to pull the plug or light up the stage whenever I choose." "Consider it done," Sarah said. "The acquisition will close within 48 hours. Congratulations, Ms. Benson. You are now the mother of the bride, so to speak." I hung up. The trap was no longer just set. It was baited locked, and I was holding the key. 2 weeks later, the day arrived. The morning sun over Memphis was sharp and unforgiving. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my dressing room. I didn't choose a dress. I chose a tailored white power suit, Armani crisp and architectural. It was the color of purity, but the cut was pure aggression. I adorned my neck not with pearls but with a geometric diamond choker that cost more than Wayne's new Cadillac. I checked my reflection. The tired, wet girl standing on the porch was gone. Staring back at me was the CEO of Phoenix Holdings. I walked down to the lobby where my driver was waiting. A stretch limousine polished to a black mirror finish sat idling at the curb. "To the Grand Magnolia Hotel, ma'am," the driver asked, opening the door. "Yes," I said, sliding into the cool darkness of the car. "And don't park in the guest lot. Park at the VIP entrance. I have a delivery to make." The car pulled away, gliding smoothly through the traffic. In my lap, I held a sleek tablet connected to the wedding venue's audiovisual system. My finger hovered over the folder labeled "The Gift." I wasn't going there to object. I wasn't going there to scream. I was going there to give my family exactly what they deserved, the truth projected in high definition. The River King Ballroom was a spectacle of excessive vanity. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a golden glow over 300 guests who were currently sipping vintage champagne that my father couldn't afford. The air was thick with the scent of thousands of white orchids imported overnight from Ecuador, their delicate petals mocking the rotting financial foundation beneath them. At the center of it all stood Nadine. She looked like a princess in her custom Parisian silk gown, holding court near the 5-tier wedding cake. She raised her left hand high, letting the stage lights catch the massive diamond on her finger, a ring bought on credit paid for by the theft of my inheritance. "It's 5 carats flawless," I heard her boast to a group of envious cousins as I approached the double doors. "Blake says nothing is too good for a Benson." Wayne and Doris stood nearby, puffing their chests out, accepting compliments on their generosity. They looked triumphant, drunk on the illusion that they had successfully erased me from the picture. I signaled the doorman. He swung the heavy oak doors open. I didn't storm in. I didn't shout. I simply walked. My white Armani suit cut through the sea of black tuxedos and pastel dresses like a blade of light. The sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor was rhythmic, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. The chatter died down, instantly rippling outward from the entrance until the entire ballroom fell into a confused silence. Wayne was the first to spot me. His face went from smug satisfaction to a shade of purple I had only seen in medical textbooks. He marched toward me, abandoning his drink on a passing waiter's tray. "You," he hissed, keeping his voice low to avoid a scene, though his eyes were bulging. "I told you that you weren't welcome. You are trespassing on a private event. Get out before I have you thrown out." He raised a hand to signal the security team stationed by the wall. "Security, escort this woman out immediately." 2 burly guards stepped forward, but before they could lay a hand on me, a man in a sharp tuxedo stepped between us. It was Mr. Henderson, the general manager of the Grand Magnolia Hotel. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Benson," Henderson said, his voice polite but steely. "Excuse me," Wayne sputtered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I am the client. I am paying for this event. She is an intruder." "Actually," Henderson corrected, smoothing his lapel, "technically Southern Charm Events holds the contract for this ballroom, and as of yesterday, Southern Charm Events is a wholly owned subsidiary of Phoenix Holdings, and this lady," he gestured to me with a bow of deference, "Ms. Benson is the CEO of Phoenix Holdings. She isn't the intruder, sir. She is the owner." Wayne froze. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. Doris, who had rushed over to support him, grabbed his arm to keep from falling. "I'm not here to ruin the party, Dad." I said, my voice projecting clearly in the silent room. I'm just here to give Nadine her wedding gift. I walked past them straight to the stage. Blake the groom was standing there, looking nervous, sweating through his tuxedo. He looked at me, then at his parents-in-law, sensing the shift in power but not understanding the source. I stepped up to the microphone. Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Eileen, the sister of the bride. I didn't get an invitation, but I thought it was important to clarify the financial future of this new union. I pulled the tablet from my clutch and tapped the screen. The massive LED wall behind the stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of Nadine and Blake's engagement photos, went black. Click. Slide 1 appeared. It was a high-resolution screenshot of my Blind Trust bank statement dated this morning. The numbers were enormous, projected 10 feet high. Current balance $8 million. Cash assets. Total net worth. Pending $31,500,000. A collective gasp swept through the room. This is what legitimate success looks like, I said calmly. I earned this. Every cent. But my family, well, they prefer a different method of acquiring wealth. Click. Slide 2 was a simple audio file icon. I pressed play. The sound system designed for live orchestras blasted the recording with crystal clarity. If that girl finds out about the $470,000 inheritance, everything is ruined. Her share is just a massive liability. Gotch ten no ji. Doris's voice, sharp and cruel, echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The guests turned to look at her in horror. Doris covered her mouth, her face draining of all color. Wayne looked as if he was having a stroke. That was my mother and father, I narrated coldly. Plotting to steal my grandmother's legacy because they were too broke to maintain their lifestyle. Click. Slide 3 appeared. It was the court document, the affidavit of diligent search. I had highlighted the section where Wayne swore under oath that I was missing in Europe. And this, I pointed to the screen, is perjury. A felony. My father lied to a judge to steal my share of the money. Money that paid for this dress, this cake, and this room. I turned to look at Blake. The groom was trembling. He was staring at the screen doing the math. He realized the rich family he thought he was marrying was actually a group of felons on the brink of bankruptcy. But Blake, I said, lowering the microphone slightly to address him directly. I did a little research on you too. I gestured toward the back of the room. The double doors opened again. 3 men walked in. They weren't guests. They wore ill-fitting leather jackets and had the hard-weathered look of men who collected debts with baseball bats. They stood silently at the exit, their arms crossed, staring straight at the groom. Blake's face turned the color of the white tablecloths. He recognized them. They were the loan sharks he had promised to pay off with Nadine's dowry. He looked at Nadine, who was standing, frozen tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. You're broke, Blake whispered, his voice cracking. You told me you were rich. You told me your sister was the loser. Blake, wait. Nadine reached for his hand. Don't touch me, he shouted, shoving her away. I'm not going to jail for you people. He didn't wait for an explanation. He tore the boutonniere from his lapel, threw it on the floor, and sprinted off the stage. He didn't run toward the main exit where the loan sharks were waiting. He bolted through the kitchen service doors, knocking over a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes. The crash of breaking glass broke the spell. The room erupted into chaos. Before Wayne could rush the stage to stop me, a nondescript man in a gray suit walked up to him from the side. He wasn't security. Wayne Benson, the man asked loudly. Not now, Wayne roared. The man slapped a thick envelope onto Wayne's chest. You have been served. Lawsuit for fraud, embezzlement, and perjury regarding the estate of Beatrice Benson. Wayne stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb. The guests were already grabbing their purses and coats, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. The whispers were deafening. Thieves, someone said. Disgusting, said another. Nadine collapsed onto the stage floor, surrounded by the ruins of her dream wedding, weeping into her unpaid-for silk dress. Doris was sitting on a chair, hyperventilating, while Wayne stood alone, holding his subpoena, watching his social standing evaporate into thin air. I tapped the tablet one last time. The screen went black. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. I stepped down from the stage, the sound of my heels once again, the only steady rhythm in the room. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, looking at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I walked past my parents. I didn't look at them. They were no longer my problem. They were just defendants in a case I had already won. As I pushed through the main doors and back out into the cool night air, I took the first deep breath I had taken in years. It tasted like victory. 6 months later, the humid heat of Memphis had given way to a biting November wind that rattled the bones of the city. But the chill I felt standing on the construction site of the new Benson Community Tech Hub wasn't from the weather. It was the sterile, quiet cold of closure. The justice system, much like the Mississippi River, moves slowly, but when it floods, it destroys everything in its path. The fallout from the wedding had been catastrophic and absolute. The Shelby County Court had not been lenient. Wayne was found guilty of perjury and fiduciary fraud. Because of his age and lack of prior convictions, he avoided a prison cell, but the judge handed down a sentence that was, for a man of his vanity, far worse than incarceration. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. Furthermore, he was permanently barred by the state of Tennessee from acting as an executor trustee or financial guardian for any living or deceased person. I saw him once a few weeks ago while I was driving downtown. He was wearing a neon orange safety vest over a tattered coat, pushing a heavy broom along the gutter of Beale Street, the same street where he used to strut around in Italian loafers, bragging about deals he never closed. He was sweeping up cigarette butts and discarded flyers, keeping his head low to avoid eye contact with the businessmen passing by. The man who demanded respect had been reduced to cleaning up the city's trash. The financial ruin was equally total. The waiver I signed had been thrown out in court immediately due to the proven fraud. The judge ordered the immediate liquidation of the family estate to pay restitution. The math was brutal. My share of the inheritance was $117,500, but the court added punitive damages for the fraud, plus my legal fees, which were substantial. By the time the gavel fell, the debt Wayne owed me exceeded $200,000. They had no cash left. They had blown it all on the wedding deposit, which was non-refundable, and the lease on the Cadillac, which was repossessed. So the court seized the house. The home I grew up in was foreclosed and sold at auction for pennies on the dollar. They were now living in a 2-room rental apartment in North Memphis, a neighborhood known for peeling paint and sirens that wailed through the night. But the person who paid the highest price was Doris. The social humiliation had shattered her mind. When the news of their fraud hit the local papers, her friends didn't just drift away. They actively shunned her. She was kicked out of her bridge club and banned from the country club guest list. Unable to process the shame her psyche had fractured, the report from my lawyer said she spent her days sitting in their cramped living room, polishing her collection of fake jewelry, muttering to herself about the gala she needed to attend next week. She had retreated into a fantasy world because the real one was too painful to endure. Ms. Benson, the car is ready. My driver's voice pulled me back to the present. I adjusted my hard hat and handed it to the foreman. We had just broken ground on a $5 million educational center for underprivileged youth, funded entirely by the interest from my trust. I walked toward the black SUV waiting at the site entrance. The press had gathered for photos, but as the crowd thinned, I saw them. Standing just outside the security gate, shivering in thin coats that weren't warm enough for November, were Wayne and Nadine. They looked like ghosts. Wayne's face was gray and gaunt, the arrogance scrubbed away by months of manual labor. Nadine looked decades older than 28. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore the stained uniform of a diner waitress under her jacket. There was no diamond on her finger, no husband by her side. Blake was long gone, having fled the state to escape his own debts. They didn't scream. They didn't make a scene. They just stood there holding plastic grocery bags, looking at me with eyes hollowed out by regret and desperation. Wayne took a half step forward, his hand raising slightly in a pathetic wave. His lips moved, and though I couldn't hear him over the wind, I knew the word. Daughter. Nadine looked at me, tears welling in her eyes, silently begging for acknowledgement. For a few $100. For a chance to be family again. My bodyguard stepped forward to intercept them, but I raised a hand to stop him. I paused by the open door of my SUV. For a brief moment, the silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of everything they had done. I remembered the rain that night. I remembered the liability. I remembered the perjury. I looked at the father who tried to erase me and the sister who wanted to dance on my financial grave. I felt nothing. No anger. No triumph. Just the dull indifference one feels for strangers on a street corner. I didn't speak. Words would be a bridge, and I had burned that bridge 6 months ago. I stepped into the car and sat down on the warm leather seat. I looked straight ahead, not glancing at them again. Let's go, I said softly. As the driver engaged the window lock, the glass slid up smoothly, sealing me inside my world of peace and blocking out their world of chaos. The last thing I saw before the tint obscured the view was Wayne's hand dropping to his side, defeated, and Nadine burying her face in her hands. The car pulled away, merging into the traffic of the city I now owned a piece of. They had gambled their flesh and blood for a pile of cash, and now they had neither. It was a lesson written in the cold wind outside. Family is a bond you nurture, not an asset you liquidate. When you trade loyalty for currency, you eventually find yourself bankrupt in the only account that matters. I opened my laptop and went back to work. I had a future to build, and looking in the rearview mirror would only slow me down.